Well, actually, research into meditation, mindfulness, was slow to get started. Add mindfulness into the basket of things that were not credible things to investigate as scientists, like emotions and consciousness for a long time. Cognitive scientists weren't particularly interested in the feels for a long time, interested more in reason, ration, and logic. Same thing with consciousness. Consciousness makes a lot of sense for the same reason why contemplative science took a minute to get onto. It's a very complex topic. Consciousness is very, very challenging to study. It's a very weird and wild phenomenon.
So welcome to the second talk in our speaker series celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Buddhism, Psychology, and Mental Health, or BPMH program. This lecture is co-sponsored by BPMH, the Robert H. N. Ho Family Foundation Center for Buddhist Studies, and the Buddhism and Psychology Student Union. I'm Frances Garrett, Associate Professor of Buddhist Studies and Director of the BPMH program. So founded in 2006, BPMH is an undergraduate minor hosted by New College at the University of Toronto. As the largest undergraduate Buddhist studies program in North America, it's internationally known also for its leadership in contemplative science education. BPMH's transdisciplinary curriculum integrates research by scientists, philosophers, Buddhist studies scholars, contemplative practitioners, and health practitioners. And although U of T has established itself as a center of excellence for contemplative science with prominent senior researchers around campus in neuroscience, clinical science, and the humanities, BPMH is the only undergraduate training program, or graduate training program for that matter, in contemplative science. So just now I referred to BPMH as transdisciplinary. Some of you may not know this term, so I want to briefly explain it. Transdisciplinarity in an academic space is about co-producing knowledge with community members. So in our case, for example, we're connecting scientists, humanities scholars, health practitioners, and meditators, or contemplative practitioners, with the aim of developing not only reliable scientific or academic knowledge, but also socially robust and socially responsible knowledge and action. This method is important in a lot of fields. Some of you might know of it, for example, in research projects with indigenous peoples, where collaboration with non-academic partners is always critical. So before I introduce our speaker, we should acknowledge that today we're gathered on a site that has for thousands of years been the home of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit, and it's still home to many indigenous peoples. A land acknowledgement can't undo violent histories against indigenous peoples on these lands, but as a community, we can work to uproot colonial legacies that impact all of us. So this brings me to introduce our speaker, Dr. Mark Miller, as the second in our 20th anniversary lecture series. I want to say at the outset that I've known Mark since 2004. Yeah. When, as an undergraduate, he took one of the very first courses in Buddhist studies that I ever taught in my life, soon after I arrived at the University of Toronto. And then after graduating from U of T, he went on to get a PhD in philosophy from University of Edinburgh and has become a really prolific researcher, author, and speaker. As a philosopher, Mark studies fundamental questions about human cognition, about the way human beings think. His research is developing new perspectives on cognition that see the mind as an engine of prediction. And he also looks at the role of embodied and environmental factors in making up what we call mind. Mark studies the impact that our increasingly technologically mediated world has on our happiness and well-being. And he's also the host of the very popular Contemplative Science podcast, which I recommend to everyone. So he's the perfect person to get us started on today's topic. What is contemplative science?
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And my class with Frances was a defining moment for me in my undergraduate, actually. I don't know if I remember every class, but I definitely remember Frances's. One of the projects was to do something Dharma related and then write on it. And I decided to be silent for a week while I was studying. And I remember it because I got in a fight with my partner without speaking. That's a bummer, when you start fighting with people even when you're not speaking. And they stormed out and I couldn't say anything. I remember that so clearly, where I held to it. Yeah, silence is a very powerful thing. Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Miller. Is it interesting to say where I am and what I'm doing? Is that, yeah, okay. I'm at a couple of places right now. My primary job is actually at Monash University in Melbourne at the new Center for Consciousness and Contemplative Studies. There was a $25 million grant given to split between two centers to do cutting-edge contemplative science and to convert that contemplative science into good practical application to help people be well. An amazing thing. It's a the donation came from philanthropic sources. That's what they wanted, was to do science and make an impact. 12 million of that went to Melbourne, 12 million of it went to Monash. And so I've been able to work with the wonderful Jakob Hui there. He's just a wonderful advisor and researcher. I'm also here at U of T, thankfully. I'm an instructor in the Cognitive Science program, also BPMH program. And I'm still a visiting researcher at Hokkaido University, which was the job I had just before I went to Melbourne. I'm still officially a visiting researcher there in their Center for Human Nature, Artificial Intelligence, and Neuroscience. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Now, reel it back. So what I do across these different departments is very close to what Francis just said contemplative science is. This is very much the beating heart of my research program. And I think it's facilitated and supported by the kind of transdisciplinary and interlabness of my career at the moment right now. Between those different labs, what I do overall is I think about what it is to be well, especially how it is to be well with tech, and what sorts of changes can we be making in our environment, and especially what kind of changes can we be making on the inside, endogenous changes that make us better suited for the kind of technologically inundated environments that we're in. A big part of that is contemplative science, thinking about the skills and states and traits that we develop on the mat in a variety of traditions that we would call a contemplative tradition, and why they and how they impact well-being is just a fascinating topic, which is actually what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to do, I don't know if this is avant-garde, I'm not sure, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of telling you about contemplative science at large, but then rather than keeping this just as a lecture about a sort of abstract topic, I'm going to talk to you about the research I'm doing. Is that okay? And it's very sexy research, if I do say so myself. It's provocative and inspiring, and I think useful. And it will be a nice laboratory for us maybe to investigate a little bit of what we're calling contemplative science, and then we can use the rest of the time just to chat, which I think is very valuable. I've over-prepared, which is standard for me. I've much too much. So I don't know if we can come back and do this again. But if you're interested, maybe we can do it online or something. I probably have 5 lectures here, not 1 lecture. So, and I think that's okay. I've made it a feature, not a bug of my talk. We're just going to get in. And then when you guys are bored, give me the chicken wing, and then we'll cut it. Okay? And I think it's sort of interesting all the way through. So if we only do 1, I think it'll be interesting. And if we do 10, it'll be interesting, I hope. Okay. So this is an awesome graph, just to start, about contemplative science. What is contemplative science? It's the science of contemplation. Well, actually, research into meditation, mindfulness, was slow to get started. Add mindfulness into the basket of things that were not credible things to investigate as scientists, like emotions and consciousness for a long time. Cognitive scientists weren't particularly interested in the feels for a long time. Interested more in reason, ration, and logic. Same thing with consciousness. Consciousness makes a lot of sense for the same reason why contemplative science took a minute to get onto. It's a very complex topic. Consciousness is very, very challenging to study. It's a very weird and wild phenomenon. In case you haven't blown your mind today, you're awake. That's weird, right? We're on a ball of dirt spinning around a ball of fire in an ever-expanding no-thingness, and we're like, hey, let's talk about some stuff. It's weird, right? Can we just land in the weirdness of it, right? Consciousness is very weird, hard to study, didn't show up in the science for a long time. And mindfulness as well. You can see here almost no publications until about 2005, and then suddenly we have a massive bump. Do you know why we had a massive bump? Early 2000s in our rigorous science of meditative states and traits? Any ideas? Yeah. Hey, that's a big part, right? So it starts getting popularized and codified. That's right, it starts becoming more interesting. But actually that's symbiotic with the science advancements as well. Do you know what else? Exactly. We didn't get the fMRI until late 90s. We weren't really, I mean, that's all we talk about today when we talk about brain science is fMRI, if you can believe it. We've only had that since the 90s. So we were finally able to probe some of the brain better than we had been in the past. That's a big deal when you're working with something very strange and almost ineffable about some of these states and traits, complex states and traits. That's true. And I think maybe put those two together and you've got quite a lot. Third is we started realizing it's awesome to put monks into scanners. Contemplative science isn't just the science of meditation. It's also using meditators in science, which is a remarkable thing to do. I don't know, has anybody here, do you guys do fMRIs? Does anybody here do that? Yeah, you like in them? No, do you do studies with them? I was like, do you? That's amazing. Right. This is a weird and wild science. They say that if you start a presentation with a brain as your first slide, people are 90% more likely to believe you. I usually start my undergraduate classes with a brain, just to biohack that a little bit. We believe what neuroscientists tell us, and yet when you really look into the science, it's a bit wobbly. Because just imagine you're putting somebody into a scanner, and then you have to ask them to do something, right? So it can't just be like, get in the scanner. You have to be like, do a task. But how many of you were able to pay attention to what I've said so far without thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow and what you're eating and whether you like beards or, I mean, like, what else have you been doing? You're already probably above average wise and above average attentionally capable. So at large, the general population that we put in an fMRI and we're like, pay attention to this. And then they come out and we're like, did you do it? And they're like, oh yeah. I don't know. Did they? Can they even self-report where their mind was? Can you do that? Like if you just check in and I'm like, hey, right now, what were you thinking about? You'd be like, I don't know. Do you know? Does everybody here know what you were just thinking about? Does anybody blacked out? Because that happens, right? I drive home on the highway and I don't remember the highway. Isn't that scary? I get home and I'm like, oh, was I on the 407? That's weird. Just checked right out. We don't know. We're not very good at self-reporting. We're not very good at introspective access. And then we have this whole community of people whose job it is to have better interceptive access. That's a gold mine if you're a neuroscientist, if you want to study attentional dynamics. Of course, then you get confounds because they're experts at using these systems. But you can put a monk into a scanner and ask them to do something, and they can self-report to a high degree. It's pretty amazing. I'm going to come back around. I think we'll get around to it. I'm doing research right now on jhanas. Do you guys know what the Buddhist jhanas are? Right. So they're advanced attention states, concentration states, absorption states. And when we're going both to advanced level lay communities and also Buddhist communities throughout Southeast Asia, we have experts of this practice who are able to click a button just before they hit these altered states and then click a button as soon as they leave them, because they have this really fine acuity to step into and then observe when they come out of. And this is just remarkably powerful as a brain scientist. And we're able to put EEGs on them in community, have them do long sits, and just dip in and out of these altered states and then mark them for us right on the scanner. Pretty remarkable stuff. I'll show you some of that research in a minute. This is Mathieu Ricard. So not only is contemplative science science of meditation and using meditators in science, the other really interesting thing is that when we put monks, when we put, not even monks, but when we put contemplatives, when we put practitioners in scanners, we saw some really interesting things. This becomes a very interesting thing to study because, well, for instance, Mathieu Ricard is, for every marker that we have for happiness at the level of the brain, he's just Babe Ruth, just wild, just recklessly different. So you're like, whatever the measure is, let's say, oh, you have 10 units of happiness. Mathieu is like 10,000. You're like, what? What kind of a brain is this? And that's very fascinating for us, that we can get markers of what a well system might look like. And then when we look at populations of contemplatives, we see these really interesting outcomes. That's very fascinating. So we have a collection of better science, more interest, great teachers, and increasingly large, sophisticated and masterful communities that are capable of entering and exiting these states, capable of embodying these traits in ways that we can actually do science over. It's a remarkably powerful fulcrum of different disciplines and different scientific opportunities that fruited all at the same time. How cool is that? I mean, if you're going to do science on something, wouldn't it be great to do science of ultra well-being? Isn't that just a very Is anybody here doing the science of well-being? Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, you are. Sure you are. It's great. Very quickly after the big bump, because like look at suddenly now everybody's, you go from 2,000 publications at all to 32,000. This is a big gulp. We got our first big slapdown from Van Dam, Nicholas Van Dam. Van Dam is the researcher who took the other $12 million, his lab at Melbourne University. It was divided between Jacob Huey and Van Dam. And not that this is exactly right, but there is like a small sense that Van Dam's lab are the critics and our lab are the like hopeful optimists. It does feel like that, which I think is actually ideal for science. You don't want to have this runaway enthusiasm. We're like, meditation will solve everything. Panacea, depression, practice. Warts, practice. You know? And there was a sense of that in the early 2000s when this really picked up, that it seemed like it was good for everything and nobody had much to say about it. That was a problem. And our first big rein-in was this excellent, really landmark paper, Mind the Hype, about all of the places that we were still light in our science of contemplation. And the biggest, can you imagine, do you know what the biggest block was? Do you know what the biggest failure was? So you have this big blossoming science of meditation. Do you know what the first big problem was? It's really good. It's very close. Give one more guess. What if I told you I was going to develop a science of meditation? What's your first worry? I'm going to do a science of meditation. What's your very first question? Any philosophers here?
How do you define meditation?
Yeah, there you go. That's what I'm talking about. Right. The perennial philosophical question. Well, what the hell do you mean by meditation? And if that's not clear, then what the hell are we studying? And that was one of the big problems, is that we had lots of communities doing lots of research, calling it meditation. Who knows what it is? It was japa, mantra, feather meditation, hot tub meditation, kitten meditation. It was attention, it was awareness, it was metacognition, it was non-dual, whatever that means. And non-duality isn't even one thing, it's a million things. Who knows what non-duality is? It's stillness meditation, non-action meditation, too much action meditation. I mean, it's just on and on and on. And people weren't doing, this is why you need philosophers on the team. I am a dyed-in-the-wool cognitive scientist today. I'm designing and running scientific experiments. But I was classically trained in philosophy. My doctorate was in philosophy of neuroscience. And this is one reason why you need a philosopher on the team, because they're really good at being critical of concepts. You know, there's this old joke where if you go to a science conference and you walk out, you'll hear everybody saying, oh yeah, I knew that, and oh, that was such a nice idea. And if you go to a philosophy conference and you walk out, you hear everybody going, that didn't make any sense at all. I don't know at all what he was talking about. And you need that. And that's what we got here, was we didn't even know what we were talking about. So we had these measures. Oh yeah, it works, it doesn't work, but we didn't really know what we were doing yet. So what we had was, we had our first big hurdle, which was we were trying to figure out this thing, and we were sort of blind, and different people were doing different things, and nobody was speaking to each other. So you need this, ultimately, this big pushback. This is native to a lot of our sciences, this sort of schizophrenic separation and siloing, insulation of different disciplines. I think it is, I want to both say it's one of the big problems in science, because while specialization is, of course, hugely important, specialization at the expense of good overall frameworks is what, for instance, Margie Bowden at the University of Sussex, one of the great movers and shakers in AI research, said that neuroscience today is more or less uninteresting fishing expeditions, because if it's only data acquisition, but it never becomes framework so that you better understand that system in response to other systems, is endless, and you never know what to do with the data. Like, who cares, just if you don't know what I mean, like, who cares if the amygdala jumps when you see a spider if you don't really understand how the amygdala is working with the other systems? If you don't have that, then all you have is data about that. So you might start thinking, well, the amygdala is the fear area. If any of you think that, that's a bummer, because that's too simplified. To date, and it's probably changed by now as we're talking, to date there's 115 operations the amygdala is involved in. It has everything to do with which area it's softly assembled with. So it's very, very complex. So we need specialization, but not specialization at the expense of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary integration. Now, it was definitely something we saw as a microcosm in contemplative science early on, and continues to be an expression of its success or its failure. It's one of the remarkably amazing things that's happening here in the Buddhist, in BPMH here at University of Toronto. This is a rare example, I mean, for somebody who's within the community, it's a really rare example of a community and a program that does this right. To have specialists not only working side by side, but working together on topics is more or less the thing that we need for this to be moved forward. Yeah, it's a real privilege to be here with you folk who are part of this community. Right, so this is a problem for science. Of course, it's a problem for contemplative science. Contemplative science done best, of course, is going to be interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. And indeed, the nice thing about contemplative science is it has to be that. How do you do a science of contemplation without thinking about the cultural embedding? How do you do it without talking to the meditators? How do you do it without neuroscience and psychology? How do you do it without anthropology, linguistics, and also AI modeling today as well? You really do need a rich group of people in the room collaborating for this to work. How's that so far? Yeah, anything new, exciting? Do you want to maybe just land just for, oh yeah, we got time. Just quick, can I do questions as we go? Is that okay? Yeah, anything there so far? Don't be shy, yeah.
I don't know if you were just sort of describing it sort of as you were speaking, but what was this sort of paper specifically written about?
Its job was to show that the meditation research was a bummer. That's what it did. It went through systematically and showed all of those chinks in the armor to say, look, you think you're measuring attention? Well, what are you all talking about? That's looking at that kind of attention, that kind of attention. That looks like working memory. That looks like awareness. That's metacognition. These are very different aims. And you're grouping them all in mindful attention. Or you're talking about equanimity. What do you mean by equanimity? Do you mean non-judgmentalness? Do you mean low affect? Do you mean coolness? Do you mean disassociation? Right? I mean, if you're in the know, you know already none of those are a perfect fit, actually, and it's very nuanced. What are you measuring when you're measuring these things? And just think, thank you for that, the targets that we're looking at when we're doing contemplative science is we're looking in particular at the states and traits that arise in contemplation. But they're very wiggly to get a hold of. For instance, well, what's a good example? So we know that being mindful of the present moment can be correlated with some well-being measures. Why? Why? Why is that the case? And the answer is complex. Is it because being mindful means you have the right orientation to those signals? Is it to do with equanimity? Is it non-judgmentalness because you're training non-judgmentalness? Is it something about mind wandering? We went down that rabbit hole for a minute where we thought mind wandering was the problem, really demonized mind wandering. I'm trying to be a voice today of a sober voice of reason about that. Mind wandering is a totally adaptive mechanism that was generated over millions and billions of years of our cognitive system being organized. Mind wandering is very, very healthy normal thing. Now it can be waylaid, but everything can be waylaid. So problematic mind wandering is a problem. Mind wandering isn't a problem. But if you start practicing, if you start practicing in a way where you're trying to abolish mind wandering, I fear that we're doing something that Dogen warned us about, which is practicing ourselves into stupidity, which I think is a problem. If you practice and you get dumber, that's a problem. You should get smarter. It should make you have more access, not less. That's hard to know, you know? You get these first little measures and it looks like, oh, we're reducing mind wandering and now we're well. Oh, well then, mind wandering out, mindful attention in. Yeah, so thanks. That was a great rendition. Anybody else? Yeah?
Yeah, do you have a working definition of meditation or mindfulness?
Geez, no, let's not do that. No, because we shouldn't. Other than to say, I'll do the uninteresting and like slightly dissatisfying meta point, which is meditation is an umbrella concept. Contemplative is an umbrella concept. Contemplation is an umbrella concept that includes a variety of skills and trainings and practices and styles that are oftentimes culturally embedded, but with lots of crossover, which is so much hope for us as animals, right? Like you can't actually own. You can't own contemplative skillfulness. That can't be owned anywhere. There's no, I really don't believe in a cultural appropriation of these things. Not only because you see the heroes of these traditions even saying, I didn't take this from here, I've been taking it from other places. But because there's so much crossover. It'd be like, you're born with a cognitive system with attention and awareness and metacognitive capabilities. That's not owned anywhere. That's everybody. It's lovely. So no, the best thing to do, I think, is to say this is an umbrella concept. And then if you're a scientist, and if you're a good practitioner too, the very next thing you should say is, oh, I meditate, and what I mean by that is this. Very similar to say I believe in God. You don't want to stop there. Who knows what that means? You want to move on to the next more interesting thing which is this is what I mean by that. Probably like that. So that's nice to know. Also because like if your friends are meditating, like I've been meditating for 30 years. Like who knows what they mean? They could mean anything, right? It's good to know. Yeah, tell me.
For your research project,
Yeah.
you mentioned jhanas. I know you're talking about meditation. Are you creating a framework with the different states of meditative consciousness? Like are you creating that framework and then having the different neurocorrelates that you've been finding?
Yes, exactly. That's a fun question. Thanks for that. Do you want to know what I do? Here, I'll tell you what I do. Is that interesting? Okay, here's the way that I do. Thank you for that. We'll just use that as a jump because that's my very next slide. I do something very, I think, interesting and a little bit different than the way science of meditation, well, all science tends to work, actually. I don't know if you know this. If you're in my classes, I have some students here. You'll know we're in a sort of Copernican revolution in cognitive science right now. It's a very exciting time to be a cognitive scientist. Some of the assumptions that we had about how the architecture works, the cognitive architecture works, turned out to be very, very wrong. No, not wrong in a weird way, but they're ready for an update, just like all Copernican revolutions are. We actually had our big, major system-wide update sort of in the 1700s, if you can believe it. We've been thinking sort of some of the core lessons we learned in the 1700s are still the core lessons we believe today about the brain. And they're just being overturned today. Did you guys know that? Did anybody not know that? Can you just see a show of hands if you didn't know that that's happening right now? Oh, that's cool. I'm going to blow your minds. Are you ready? No, this is so cool. I'm going to deviate for a second to blow your mind, and then I'm going to come back and tell you why it's relevant for contemplative science, okay? We thought for a long time that the way that, for instance, perception works is lights bounce off of objects in the world, change their frequency, hit the sensory edge, in this case your eye, and then the brain processes that information from low and simple up through complex. And the end product of that driving signal pushing up through your visual cortex is your experience. That's what we thought for a long time. Actually, Descartes codified that in the 1700s. Before that, it was very weird. It was all about soul imprintings and God's delivery of truth. And he codified it and said, no, actually, it's about frequencies and your eyes and then your brain. But that image of the brain, that rendition of the brain, characterizes the brain as very, very passive. Andy Clark calls that the cognitive couch potato view, where the brain is waiting around to be poked, and then it goes through the process of figuring out, well, what was I just poked by, okay? We've almost entirely flipped that on its head just in the last few years. And this isn't a fringe idea, it's now the predominant computational view in neuroscience. But it came in hot and fast, partially because of its elegance and the way that it's solving a bunch of long problems. But we flipped that idea upside down almost entirely. So the brain isn't passive at all, it's radically proactive. The brain and the nervous system evolved first and foremost to figure out how the world works and how you work and how other people work, so that it can make for itself from the top down what it expects to be happening next. And you are consciously aware of the guess, not the signal. Isn't that amazing? Just, anybody, do you guys meditate? Do people here meditate? Show of hands. Yeah, are people here like either Buddhist or Buddhist adjacent? Okay. I just feel like Buddha is in the heavenly realms clapping when I talk about this neuroscience model. Because what it says is that you're not just interpreting what's out there. You are making your experience endogenously. You are fabricating, you are constructing your experience moment to moment to moment from the top down based on the things you believe and expect. That's just the neuroscience of emptiness, because it just says all of perception is fabricated. Isn't that lovely? Ugh. Oh, I love my job. Okay, so what I do is I don't start from a phenomenon, equanimity, joy, depression, anxiety, whatever. That's a common way that you'll do this in neuroscience or in psychology, is you'll start with a phenomenon, and then you'll go and try to test it to either see where it is in the brain, or you'll put it in a psychological biosocial lab to see, well, what are the ramifications of that? So flow leads to happiness. Let's go check out if that's true. Yeah, like this. This modeling work allows us another opportunity, which is instead of starting from the phenomenon, we start from the shape of the system itself. Start from the shape of the cognitive system itself. And then we can start from there, and then we can come out to seeing, okay, well then, what would depression look like if this is the shape of the architecture? What does a meditation and attention training do if this is the architectural setup? Called a first principles approach. So you don't start from the phenomenon, you start from figuring out who and what you are first, and then we can start asking, well, given that, what happens if we start controlling endogenously our own attention profiles? And it's remarkably powerful as a way of doing contemplative science. Am I going to tell you about this? Am I going to tell you about this? Yes. Yes, I'm going to tell you about this. So, one of the governing principles within this framework is the power of attention. I'm just going to give you a little bit so that I can tell you a little bit about some of the things I'm doing in the science. Is that okay? Is this reasonably interesting? Yes? Okay. Give me the chicken wing. If it's no good, we'll move on to something else. Okay. Attention turns out to be a real powerhouse in this framework. So you're all the time trying to predict what happens next. And to do that, one of the things that your brain is trying to determine is how reliable are your predictions and how reliable is the world. And it uses that calculation about how reliable your predictions are, how reliable your model is of the world, or how reliable certain signals are in the world. It's using what we call second order predictions about how reliable these things are to make a good mix of your model in the world so that you can cope with the world. Okay? So for instance, depression is well here, let's do this very quickly. Oh no, I'll come to it in a second. Depression is typified by an overly powerful, high-level model about how the world is. And do you know what the model is that you're running when you have depression? We've all been depressed. John Teasdale says it's very natural 4 or 5 times in your lifetime to have a depression, totally okay. What's the big model on tap when you're depressed? What's the prediction you have about yourself in the world when you're depressed? Do we all know? Insanity check for me. Yeah, everything's a bummer, right? I'm a bummer, the world's kind of a bummer, right? That's the model that's on tap. And actually the work of Zindel Siegel and Norm Farb, par excellence at this university, they are just rock stars and working completely within the fold of this new computational regime. We can actually see that model, the power of that model in the brain. This is pretty amazing. We can see this. You can look at neural dynamics. We can map them in the brain now. And we can create these nice 3D models of how often or how little do the neural dynamics tend to organize into particular sets. Okay? And we can map that as attractor basins. So if your neural dynamics tend to reorganize in the same way over and over and over again, you get this great big dip in the neural dynamical field. Do you get that? Okay, like gravity. And if you've got a great big dip, where does the ball tend to roll? And when it gets stuck there, does it tend to bump out, right? So you always have a landscape of different places that your neural dynamics can attract to, but you can have these really powerful wells. This is pretty remarkable research. This is one of the rare times that we can see actually in the brain a particular psychopathology. We can't normally do that. You can't just tell from the brain something's gone wrong with somebody. You can with depersonalization, you can with depression, you can with addiction, certain kinds of addiction. Depression you can now. We can just get a fingerprint of it, that you have this great big well. And that's because no matter what's going on, the likelihood that you'll fall back into that attractor basin of this isn't working out for me, this is no good, the world's no good, is highly, highly, highly probable. We all know that though, right? I don't need to preach that, we know this, okay. Right, so that is an example, according to this framework, of having a very powerful model. And the work of Norm Farb and Zindel Siegel is just amazing here. They showed 10 years ago that you can see this fingerprint, especially in the midline part of the brain, that's doing a lot of self-relevant processing. So you put somebody in an fMRI, you actually look at how the brain is working, and what we see is this really powerful midline activation stuff. That's all self-relevant processing stuff. And then 10 years later, and they thought that was the problem. They thought, well, the problem is it's a very selfish thing, in a way, depression. It's all about you, self-oriented thing. It's all about you. Then they showed 10 years later, roughly, that actually the main problem might not be that activation, but that when this midline activates strongly, it closes, like a teeter-totter, it closes down sensory accumulation channels. So the more that you're confident about the world being a bummer, the less you listen to any counter evidence. Now, why would extreme confidence in some particular model be the same as I'm not listening to counter evidence to that model? Can you guess? Can you say it? Insanity check for me. Why, if you have a very strong prediction that it's going to be one way, that's what we call precision, the volume of that is turned up. Why does that turn the volume down on counter evidence? Why are you no longer in the business of looking for more evidence? Sorry? Safety? It is. It does have to do with safety. Anybody else?
Less energy.
Energy is the answer. Metabolism, those are all right though, right. Why would you spend costs checking on something you're ultra confident about? It should work like a wing, where when you're high confidence in the model, closes the sensory channels for cost's sake. In the wild, we don't have a bunch of bonus fat to be like, oh, I don't know, let me check on this thing that's ultra confident. You're like, no, that's confident, take it off the board, get back to work. And we see this in depression, it comes right out of this model. So you're making these predictions. You have this quantity we call precision that's toggling the volume. The difference between these models and other evidence, we see in depression this big crank up, high level model, this closing or lowering of precision at the sensory edge. So do you know how you get better? So if that's the case, so here's the cool part about the computational profiling of these things. If that's one way of characterizing depression, how do you get better? Well, you have to either diminish your confidence in that model. That's like ACT therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy is excellent at pushing against these models, right? You say, I can't do anything. And your therapist says, okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to wake up and say, I accept the fact that I don't think I can do anything. Step one. And then I'd like you to do these 5 things. And then I'd like you to call me and say, I did them. And I will give you a phone high five. And that's just a way of accumulating counter evidence to this model. 2, you can microdose psilocybin as long as you don't have a warning label. The evidence for psilocybin's impact on long-lasting medicine-resistant depression is pretty convincing. We can actually see it in these neurodynamical models where these big trenches fill in when you take psychedelics. This is eminently relevant for contemplative science. I'm coming right back to it. And then when they are done the trip, the depth of those attractor basins never goes back to its same depth, even after one use. Now, warning label, if up to your grandparents' siblings have schizophrenia, no bueno. You're not supposed to do anything even microdosing because you have the gene that can be expressed to cause the kind of wobbliness deep in the model that can cause problems. Okay, so you can increase uncertainty about that model, which is exactly what psilocybin does. It increases uncertainty in the system. I'm going to come back to that. Third, most powerful, you can use contemplation, use meditation techniques. How? Well, this quantity precision is driving the show. Where it turns the volume up, that's what matters. Okay? It is synonymous with attention. That is attention in the paradigm. So what you're learning when you're learning to have better control of your attention through developing metacognition, awareness, and attentional strategies, skills and states and traits, is you're learning to endogenously control those volume sets. So then you can do something very interesting. You can pay attention to the moment. And if you pay attention to the sensory evidence, it has exactly the same effect the other way. Why would paying attention to the moment automatically reduce your confidence in a model? This is good. Let's talk it out. You got it? Why would paying attention to the moment automatically reduce the confidence and so the tyranny of a high-level model that's gone sort of pathological, that's pathologically strong? Why is that? Good, close.
Well, you're trying to predict a future that's uncertain, and you're undermining it by having present moment experiences that go against it.
Right, right. The moment's so fresh. It's never perfectly modelable. Spending time here jeopardizes long-term models because you lose the confidence that that's the case. And what you're signaling to your system is, let's pay attention to new stuff. Then your system is like, oh, well, if we're paying attention to new stuff, it's because there must be good stuff to learn. That means our models are sufficiently uncertain. Because if they're ultra uncertain, we wouldn't be looking. And you can actually hack it exactly that way, which is the research that we're doing. It's pretty remarkable. I'm going to skip this bit about feeling states, because we're gonna land at a time sooner than later. If you want to know, that's the calculation for how to be happy. I don't know if you're interested in being happy, just there it is. It's a very easy thing, actually. Actually, this is what Rob Rutledge thinks happiness is. We rail against this. We say happiness is more than this, but this is at least momentary subjective hedonic well-being. And what that calculation actually just says is you feel good when you manage prediction error. When your predictions get better and better and better, it feels good. We can leave that for right now, though. How's it going? Is this okay so far? Is it interesting? Yeah? Okay, let's roll it back to contemplative science. I'm going to flash forward. Oh, let me just land there for a second, just for a quick Q&A. How long can I go past the hour? Can I go 5 minutes or 10 minutes? It's okay? Okay. Let's just land there for a second in case there's questions, interests, worries. Yeah?
You talked about top-down, but you didn't talk about bottom-up.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. The bottom-up is the mismatch between the model that you have of the world and the way the world actually is. We call it a prediction error. Thank you. This is going to be critical in a moment. So if you expect the world to be some way, and then the world doesn't turn out to be that way, there's a difference. That difference is logged within the system as an error, as a form of uncertainty. It means your model's not good enough. And then the system can do one of two things there. It can either update its model to better fit the world, or it can update the world to better fit its model. So a good example of that is if the temperature drops, and you're at an unexpected temperature. Now, if that temperature goes too unexpected, there's too much surprise, what happens? Does anybody know the joke? Do I have any students here? I get all my students to yell death every time I go like this. So I'll have whole classrooms of like 200 students go, death! Right, so if your temperature becomes too uncertain, you die. It has to be within that very certain set. Like if I sample your temperature at any point in time in your life, what's the likelihood I get it within a couple of degrees? Exceptionally high. Why? Because if that wasn't the case, death. Right, okay, good. So that's what the system's doing, is it's trying to predict the environment to self-organize in ways that keep it alive. Okay, but what do you do if the temperature starts dropping? Well, one thing you could do is you could update the model to better fit the world. That's like Wim Hof. You just do cold exposure enough that you get very comfortable with half a degree difference that most people don't have, or a degree difference. I think Wim Hof, this Iceman, he just climbed Mount Everest in sandals. Is that right? Do you know that? Yeah, he climbed Mount Everest in sandals, weirdo. That ends up being a bit more costly, metabolically expensive. You have to really invest in that. Or you can change the world to better fit the expectation. In that case, that's just getting a hot tea or a blanket and getting cozy, turning up your thermostat. Those are behaviors you can do to get the world to better fit. The most important thing there is that according to this theory of the brain, what the brain is on about is trying to figure out how it works, make good predictions, and then squash errors. By squashing errors, you keep making your model and the world fit each other better. And the orchestrating power there is attention. It's a really amazing thing to learn. There's let's say two quick things that are important for contemplative science. Not for telling you what contemplative science is, but telling you the power of this science maybe. Two really important take-homes, if you don't take anything else from this, that I'd like to leave you with. One, if this theory is right that we're working on, that means the world that you live in isn't the world out there, but your best guess about the world. And that means the beliefs that you have and that you encode are much more important than you might think they are. Now, that's a long-standing understanding in wisdom traditions, contemplative wisdom traditions in particular. What you're trying to do in order to show up into the world in the right way isn't to change the world necessarily, but to change yourself. Krishnamurti, I don't know if you've ever seen this video, it's black and white. I think he's talking to students at Harvard Law. They're all sitting on the ground around him back in the 60s maybe. And somebody says, well, how do I change the world? And then he laughs at them, right? He goes, no. You don't change the world, you change yourself. You change yourself. And then you'll have a bang-on effect. That's sort of the way to go. That's very, very relevant here, because actually your reality is based on the things you believe and do and the way you set your attention. Now, I just want to, if you didn't catch it, let me lay it down one more time, okay? That means the things that you do and the things that you selectively attend to, they're not just these side effect things. They're not like, oh, I'm Mark, and there's the world, and I doom scroll 8 hours a day. Like, who cares? Yeah, I'm a little bit upset by it, but what's the big deal? It changes it from that to doom scrolling is changing your predictions about the world, and that's making your reality. It's making your experience. And that is radical in the science, but I think we already all know that, don't we? Are you all having weird relatives come to Thanksgiving now believing strange things? Are you having that yet? And are you yet confident that this is from the AI-led wandering that they're encountering day by day by day that's subtly undermining their sense? Are we having this? I have this. My brother believes in aliens now. It's one of the things that can happen. I mean, there probably are aliens, but he believes in them probably not a great way. Right, so one, the things that you believe and where you attend aren't side effects. They are the thing that makes your reality. And I think contemplatives known of that for a long time. Like the Buddha wasn't like, oh, like this attention awareness training stuff, do it on the side. You know, like it's okay. No, it's like, no, this is the project. If you have the sort of structure in your life that allows you to do this kind of project, this is the game. This is the only game in town. And it's going to pay these massive dividends, because the more you understand yourself and the more you learn to selectively sample well, you're going to show up into a very different experience of this world. And this is such a lovely neuroscience to show that. That's one thing. And two, if you want to change the world you live in, we can do that. You can change it by selectively sampling better evidence. But to do that, you have to have some control over the kind of evidence you have coming in. Part of that's out there. It's like getting the right relationship with social media, probably, and the right relationship with other humans. That's eminently valuable, important. but has a lot to do with your own controllability over your resources, internal mental resources. Attention is paramount there. So if you're a cognitive system and your world is constituted by, constructed by, not biased by, constituted by the things that you believe and predict, then your ability to believe and predict well is extremely valuable. And that is at the very heart of all of the contemplative traditions. So this is a lovely, I'm glad I said all of this, even though I know it's not dead center with what contemplative science is, but the great take home from that is such an interesting, powerful moment where you see the confluence of spiritual contemplative training programs and the science at large are just banging right into each other. And now notice, I didn't pick mindfulness because I'm interested in mindfulness. What I did was I started from your brain as a prediction engine. And the way that it lives well is by augmenting attentional regimes well, so that you have a good dynamic relationship between what you expect and what's actually there. Okay, well then, if that's the case, then attention training turns out to be critical. Because attention training is training that resource at the beginning, the middle of the system. And all of well-being and so much of pathology, we've done research now on addiction, depression, social media, and pathologies like Snapchat surgery, Snapchat body dysmorphia, depersonalization, derealization, OCD, PTSD, trauma, pain, chronic pain. We've done this analysis where we've built computational models, new frameworks for understanding all of these pathologies, and they share something very important in common. At some level of the hierarchy, attention has gone problematically wrong. The volumes within the model no longer reflect the real world dynamics for one reason or another. And the trending back, this is a pretty gloomy 10 years of my research. And we took all of this and found a fingerprint of pathology which is all about attentional dysregulation in one way or another, belief dysregulation in one way or another. And then we turned it to start thinking about, well, what works? So we've also published work on what is happiness, resilience, the value of play, even video games, Animal Crossing and Elden Ring in particular. If you're into masochore games, check it out. Curiosity, playfulness in the meaning and meaningful life. And onward to the contemplative programs we've done, we've found that all of these share something in common. All of the problems share something in common. It's a problem in belief and a problem in precision, this volume, attention. And all of these are in some way the maturity and good regulation of and healthy capabilities within exactly the same sets. The sorts of beliefs that you're encoding and where and how your attention is being used. That's just a wonderful outcome, because now we're not meditating because somebody told us to, but we're looking for attention, awareness, metacognition training programs because they are underlying all of this research on pathology and all of the research on well-being. That's the starting place for our contemplative program. And then I'll tell you something interesting about meditation if we have any time left. How's that for that? Questions? Is that interesting? It's cool, right? Even if all you do is just think what I believe really matters. So start thinking about how can I believe better? I don't know if people are thinking like that yet, but it's a very valuable thing to think. And it's right at the heart of contemplative training. Because what do you do when you, meditation, right? One thing you might do in meditation is you might continually ask, well, what is that? Am I right? I thought it was that. Is it that? Oh, there's a pain. Is that pain? What's pain like? Yeah? All of that is model updating in exactly the way that we're talking about. That's healthy. Any questions? Do you want to know something cool about meditation? Yeah, can you stomach? Is it exciting? Is it nice, exciting? Okay, good. You want to know one thing about Zen? Yeah, and then we can go. Yeah, okay. Zen. Here's something cool that we get right out of the model. Why does Zen make you better? Oh, we could have a bunch of ho-hum explanations. We could also have what the literature tells us, like the canon tells us. And that's all good. That's all good. But we can also look for a first principle explanation of why it makes us better. Here's one place that I was surprised by what the science told me. Not moving makes you better. Now, lots of stuff is going on in Zen. So it's not the only thing making you better. But did you know not moving makes you better? Did you know that sitting with your eyes closed and your hands in a very rigid posture and not moving can make you better? And that by itself makes you better. Now, how many people who are going to study Zen who didn't start from that view would pick the not moving to be one of its interesting desiderata? Wouldn't you think, no, it's got to be the attention, it's got to be the koan, it's got to be the master-student relationship, it has to be the power of the mantras, the chants. I don't think many people are thinking the posture itself is going to make you well. Maybe in Zen practitioners are pretty nerdy about their posture, right? Yeah, exactly. Is that right? Yeah. Isn't it? Just sitting, right. But who knew it was the sitting part, not the just. Like the sitting itself makes you better. There we go. Now let me give you the computational explanation of why it's the case so we can really feel it. This is Antoine Lutz and Giuseppe Pagnoni, amazing contemplative scientists. And I'm going to throw Norm and Zindel in there as well because they're doing the very similar things. They've done amazing research on the value, starting from this computational framework, for thinking about just sitting. Here's the thing that they found. They found that when you just sit, you increase the entropy. You increase the entropy within the brain. You increase the uncertainty within the brain. Increasing uncertainty also means increasing connectedness. Why is more connection synonymous with more entropy, with more uncertainty? Do you know why? Why would more connectivity mean the brain is less certain? Do you know why?
More possibility.
More possibility, exactly. More entropy means more possibility. Now, you don't want so much entropy that your brain just falls out of your ear. But it's healthy to occasionally have bursts of big uncertainty because that's going to jostle the system out of these potentially pathological certainties. This actually here, where you're seeing this update, that's psilocybin. That's placebo and psilocybin. So that's just an example of the entropy gradient dynamics that are going to arise when you take something like psilocybin. We see them exactly in contemplative training as well. And we see them being instigated even from things like non-moving. The reason is, thank you for your question earlier, because I would have missed it. I would have to tell you about it now. So now we're all set up for it. There's two ways that you can manage uncertainty in the world. You can update your model or you can change the world. And if you freeze and you no longer allow yourself to make any behaviors that can update the world in any way, you force model update. The model has to change. The model can't stay the same. It keeps itself the same by iteratively checking on itself. If you can't move, if you can't update the world, then the only thing left is model updating. So you force entropy dynamics. You force the brain to go into a revision mode where the model starts optimizing itself because it has nothing to do with optimizing the world. It's the same thing we're finding in REM sleep. The reason why sleep is so healthy for you is because your body stops moving in part and it forces model optimization. It forces the brain to prune itself because the brain isn't now directing real world stuff. You have a temporary reprieve. So my most recent research project, I'm just about to drop the first, I think, serious science paper on this, is on dark retreat, the Tibetan practice of dark retreat, with Andrew Holchek, who's really the dark retreat guy right now in the West, looking at exactly these dynamics where you cut off sensory experiences in order to force model optimization. And then we have a whole computational story about wrathful and peaceful deities. We can leave that for another day. So interesting and exciting. Right, so what we actually see, again, this is LSD, but we're seeing the same thing in the contemplative research. With placebo effect, look, these are the attractor basins I was telling you about. And look at how the attractor basins, they thin themselves out. They become much more shallow, much more narrow. That is an exact expression of more uncertainty within the system. A system that's uncertain doesn't know where to set its pressures. That's exactly what we're seeing from not moving. And so we see this shift. Instead of the brain trying to predict the world, it starts trying to predict itself. It starts optimizing over itself. And so rather than having these high-level predictions that are augmenting our perception, we start getting a much more balanced precision deployment across deep-level models and real-world stuff. So if you make your models less certain, if you start being more uncertain about the environment, what does attention have to do? So now you're not acting, you're forcing uncertainty into the system. If the system starts to be uncertain, what does it have to do? Where does attention have to go now? Sorry? Right, exactly. It has to come right back down into the world of possibilities. Because what you're communicating to the brain is you're not sure what's going to happen next. So the brain has to go, oh, well then, we got to figure it out. Which is why on psychedelics and also in contemplative training, you'll come out of a sit and the world will look fresh. Just like you're childlike again. Like, oh, hands. I don't know if you, do you know this? Like, yeah, you know, sometimes you just walk through the park and then you're crying. You're just crying by yourself. That happens if you spend a lot of time on the mat, I think. You're just like, oh, leaves. Look how beautiful they are. Well, how's that happening? That moving moment, that awe and wonder is actually a mark. Well, it's a mark both of psychedelic experiences. It's also a mark of contemplative experiences. And we think computationally it's a mark of increased entropy within the system. The system has to come back out and figure out what it is like again, which is a very childlike attitude. Not childish, but childlike. Last point, and then I'm going to let you guys just guide the rest of the discussion. This is just work by Helene Slechter and Ruben Lakonen, fabulous contemplative scientists using the active inference predictive processing framework to drive their agenda, doing what I think is just the most exciting science of mindfulness, science of meditation today. And this is a chart from one of their papers where they show, like, ordinarily with mind wandering, you have this deep temporal activation stuff. In mind wandering, you're just having models expressing other models, unanchored, right? Unmoored from the present moment. Literally, that's what a mind wander is. And then they show that with focused attention, you're actively bringing attention down here, which removes the power from the high-level models, creating uncertainty. Or with open monitoring, you just take the power off of everything. You say just model or sensory experience. I'm just gonna have a hands-off experience over everything. I'm gonna leave non-dual out for today because there's some bones to pick. But for both focused attention and open monitoring, they propose in this paper, many to one, that the beneficial effects in part are going to be characterized by this flattening of that attractor landscape, either because you're attending to the moment, so you're generating uncertainty deep up, or you're just taking your hands completely off of anything, which is going to evenly distribute the load. So rather than having this powerful model drive perception, you're getting a more balanced, more homogeneous, temporary interaction between these deep level models and your experience of the world. And I'll just leave you on, I do research on psychedelics, as you can see, and contemplative states. So I keep getting invited to psychedelic spaces, to like psychedelic festivals and beaches and, right? And I think they expect me to show up. They keep putting me on these boards to talk. And I think they're looking, because everybody else on the board is like, yeah, let's talk about the science of getting high. And I think they're always surprised that I'm always the sober presenter, where I'm like, I don't know, you shouldn't do any of these things. So I want to just give that as a final, because we've talked a lot about the benefits here. You get the same benefits. So our jhana research, there's me and my colleague, Jonas Mago. That's Shayla Catherine, if you know, she's a big jhana teacher here in the West. That's some of our preprints on these, just in case you want to find them. I'll just have them up there. We found that you have very similar changes in entropy within the system that we think are beneficial in psychedelics. But the difference between contemplatives and psychedelic users is it's more controlled, it's more progressive. The set and setting are already baked in. You don't have to go to like a cool place to do it and then cool down afterwards, which turns out to be really, really important for whether or not you feel better or not with psychedelic use. Because if you're doing meditation, I think, well, you're embedded in a community with a good teacher, with good teachings, even if they're not one teaching or many teachings, you're already in the framework for wisdom. And by the time that you're capable to start endogenously adjusting entropy profiles in your own brain, you have already done a lot of the work of growing up and cleaning up and waking up along the way. And so those things fall much better than sort of psychedelic tourism, where you go with any old mind state and you're like, come on, shamans, blow me out. And who knows what the outcome is. Like this poor young man from Silicon Valley, very famous billionaire, and very, very public about his going to a dark retreat recently. And then he left on day 3 and said, like, you know, I would rather not spend my week off of work experiencing my own version of the ring, which is just like, he just was like, monsters were eating my soul the whole time. Unprepared, underprepared mind going into something very extreme. And dark retreat, the Tibetans call a forceful practice. Anytime a Tibetan talks about a forceful practice, I really hear that, because they don't think all of the practices are forceful, that are very forceful. So they're like, this is the forceful one. You're like, oh, okay. Well, then let's just leave that one for a minute. But we see it, it's more controlled. The frames stay the same. So you're not getting distributed entropy across the whole system. You're getting more localized uncertainty upgrades. You can cool down when you want. So actually anything that you'd want to get out of psychedelics, we're showing you can get that out of contemplative skills and states and traits, not only as well, but in like in a much better way, I think. Now, that's half the science and half my opinion, so I'll lift my hands to it. And that's probably enough for today. Thanks for your time.